Introduction: The Enigma of Serpent Mound. On a quiet plateau in southern Ohio, far from the great stone circles of Europe and the monumental temples of the Old World, a colossal figure lies hidden in the landscape. From the ground, it is almost impossible to grasp its true form. But seen from above, the earth itself reveals a secret. A giant serpent, uncoiling across the ridge, its body winding in elegant curves, its jaws open as if about to swallow a great, oval form. This is Serpent Mound, one of the most mysterious ancient monuments in North America. At first glance, it may seem simple, just earth and grass shaped into a long, low embankment. Yet the longer we look, the more questions arise. Why a serpent? Why here on this particular ridge? And how did a culture without metal tools, without writing, and without modern instruments create a structure so precise, so symbolically rich, and so deeply connected to the sky above? For centuries, Serpent Mound was dismissed as a curiosity, an oddity created by what early scholars assumed were primitive peoples. But that assumption tells us more about modern prejudice than about ancient reality. Today, as new research and technology allow us to see this monument more clearly, Serpent Mound is emerging as something far more profound. A carefully designed work of geometry, astronomy, and cosmology, one that stands intellectually alongside monuments such as Stonehenge. The location itself invites reflection. Serpent Mound rests on a narrow ridge overlooking Brush Creek, in a region shaped by ancient geological forces. Beneath the mound lies the edge of a prehistoric meteor impact crater, a detail unknown to its builders in scientific terms, yet perhaps sensed in mythic or symbolic ways. The ridge is not merely high ground. It is a liminal place, suspended between earth and sky, water and stone, life and death. Such locations have held sacred meaning in cultures across the world. This monument does not contain burials. Unlike many other earthworks in the Ohio Valley, Serpent Mound was not built to house the dead. Instead, it seems to have been created for the living, for observation, for ceremony, and for alignment with cosmic cycles. Its sinuous body appears to move with purpose, guiding the eye along a deliberate path, as if telling a story written not in words, but in form and motion. What makes Serpent Mound especially compelling is its relationship to the sun and the rhythms of time. Certain points along the serpent's body align with the setting sun during solstices and equinoxes. These alignments are not random. They suggest careful, long-term observation of the sky, knowledge accumulated over generations and encoded directly into the landscape. This was not casual stargazing. It was applied astronomy, embedded in ritual and belief. When we compare Serpent Mound to Stonehenge, the materials differ, earth instead of stone, but the intellectual ambition is strikingly similar. Both monuments transform the natural environment into a calendar. Both anchor human life to celestial order. And both reveal societies deeply invested in understanding their place within a living cosmos. So the true mystery of Serpent Mound is not whether it is impressive. We can see that it is, but whether we are prepared to recognize what it represents. It challenges the long-held narrative that advanced scientific thinking belonged only to ancient Europe or the Near East. Instead, it invites us to reconsider the intellectual achievements of the indigenous cultures of North America. As we begin this journey into the world of Serpent Mound and the astronomers of the Ohio Valley, we are not simply exploring an archaeological site. We are stepping into a different way of seeing the universe, one in which geometry, landscape, myth, and the movement of the sun are woven into a single, elegant expression of knowledge. Discovery and the first attempts to understand Serpent Mound. The story of Serpent Mound's discovery is, in many ways, a story about misunderstanding. Not of the monument itself, but of the people who built it. When European settlers began moving into the Ohio Valley in the 18th century, they encountered a landscape filled with vast earthworks, circles, squares, octagons, and long embankments whose scale rivaled anything they had seen before in the New World. Serpent Mound stood out even among these wonders, yet it was approached with confusion rather than curiosity. The first written descriptions of Serpent Mound appeared in the late 1700s, but it was not until the 19th century that the site was carefully documented. In 1848, Ephraim Squire and Edwin Davis published detailed maps and drawings in their landmark work Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. Their illustration of the Great Serpent, viewed from above, revealed for the first time the full elegance and intentionality of its design. For many readers, it was a revelation and a shock. Yet, even as the monument was being carefully recorded, its meaning was misunderstood. 19th century scholars, shaped by colonial thinking, struggled to believe that the ancestors of contemporary Native American tribes could have created something so complex. This disbelief gave rise to the infamous mound builder myth, the idea that the earthworks were built by a lost, advanced civilization unrelated to indigenous peoples, sometimes imagined as Phoenicians, Israelites, or even Atlanteans. These theories said more about the biases of the time than about the evidence on the ground. Early archaeologists also tried to interpret Serpent Mound through familiar categories. Many assumed it must be a burial mound, because that was how earthworks were commonly understood. Excavations, however, revealed something unexpected. There were no graves inside the serpent. This absence was deeply puzzling. If the mound was not meant for the dead, then what was its purpose? Dating the monument proved equally challenging. For decades, Serpent Mound was attributed to the Adena culture, an ancient society known for its burial mounds and ritual landscapes, active roughly between 1000 BCE and 200 BCE. This attribution seemed logical at first, but it was based more on proximity and assumption than on firm evidence. Later radiocarbon dating suggested a different possibility, that the mound was constructed much later, around 1000 CE, by the Fort Ancient culture. This debate over authorship is more than an academic disagreement. It shapes how we understand the intellectual context of the monument. If Serpent Mound was built by the Adena, it reflects an early tradition of symbolic earthworks. If it was built by the Fort Ancient people, it represents the culmination of centuries of accumulated astronomical and geometric knowledge. Some scholars now suggest that the site may have been modified or reinterpreted over time, used by multiple cultures who recognized its power and significance. What is clear is that early researchers lacked the tools to fully grasp what they were seeing. Without aerial photography, satellite imagery, or precise astronomical modeling, they could only guess at the mound's deeper functions. From ground level, Serpent Mound appears fragmented, just a series of rises and curves. Its true coherence only becomes visible when viewed from above, a perspective unavailable to its builders in a literal sense, yet somehow present in their planning. This paradox, designing something best understood from the sky without ever seeing it from the sky, should have prompted awe. Instead, it often led to dismissal. The monument was treated as an artistic curiosity rather than an intellectual achievement. Only much later did scholars begin asking a different kind of question. Not who else could have built this, but what level of knowledge would be required to build this? That shift in perspective marked the beginning of a more respectful and revealing approach, one that would gradually uncover Serpent Mound not as an isolated oddity, but as part of a sophisticated tradition of science, symbolism, and sacred landscape design in the Ohio Valley. And with that shift, the serpent began to awaken, not as a myth, but as a message waiting to be understood. Architecture and geometry of Serpent Mound. To truly understand Serpent Mound, we must stop thinking of it as a simple figure carved into the earth and begin seeing it as a carefully planned architectural work. This is not random piling of soil. It is intentional design, measured, repeated, and refined, executed on a monumental scale. Serpent Mound stretches for more than 400 meters, following the natural contours of a narrow ridge. The embankment itself averages about 1 to 1.5 meters in height and roughly 6 meters in width, though these dimensions vary subtly along the body. Such variation is not a flaw. It is a response to the landscape. The builders did not impose a rigid form onto the terrain. Instead, they shaped the terrain into a form, blending geometry with topography in a way that feels almost organic. The serpent's body moves in a series of elegant, rhythmic curves. These bends are not arbitrary. When measured, many of the curves repeat similar radii, suggesting the use of consistent units of length and curvature. This implies planning, not improvisation. Even without metal tools or written plans, the builders achieved proportional harmony across hundreds of meters, something that would be difficult even with modern surveying equipment. One of the most striking features is the coiled spiral at the tail. Spirals are among the most powerful geometric symbols known to ancient cultures worldwide. They appear in Neolithic Europe, in Mesoamerica, in Asia, and across indigenous North America. Geometrically, a spiral represents continuity and motion. Symbolically, it expresses cycles of time, seasons, life, and death. At Serpent Mound, the spiral tail seems to anchor the entire structure, marking not an end, but a beginning. Moving along the body, the serpent gradually straightens before opening into a wide, unmistakable head with an open mouth. Directly in front of this mouth lies an oval-shaped earthwork. Scholars have debated its meaning for decades. Is it an egg, the sun, a symbol of rebirth or cosmic creation? From a geometric perspective, the oval contrasts sharply with the flowing curves of the serpent, drawing immediate attention. It is the focal point of the entire composition. What makes Serpent Mound especially unique among the earthworks of the Ohio Valley is what it lacks. There are no burial chambers. Most monumental earthworks in the region, particularly those of the Adena and Hopewell traditions, contain human remains or grave goods. Serpent Mound does not. This absence strongly suggests that its primary function was not funerary, but ceremonial, observational, or symbolic. When we compare Serpent Mound to other earthworks in Ohio, its sophistication becomes even clearer. Nearby sites include perfect circles hundreds of meters across, precise squares, and massive octagons aligned with lunar cycles. These shapes demonstrate a deep understanding of geometry, right angles, symmetry, and proportional relationships, executed at a landscape scale. Serpent Mound fits naturally into this tradition, even though its form is figurative rather than abstract. This raises an important point. Geometry was a language. For the ancient peoples of the Ohio Valley, shapes were not decorative. They encoded meaning. Circles could represent the sun or the cyclical nature of time. Squares and octagons could reflect order, balance, and cosmic structure. The serpent, with its curves and coils, may represent dynamic energy, the living force that moves through the universe. From the ground, Serpent Mound feels almost modest. It does not tower above the land. It invites walking, tracing, and participation. This suggests that the builders intended people to move along it, to experience its geometry physically. Knowledge here was not abstract. It was embodied. You learned by walking the serpent, by standing at certain points, by watching the horizon. In this sense, Serpent Mound is both architecture and instruction. It teaches through form. It guides the body and the eye. And as we will soon see, it also guides the gaze upward, toward the sun, the moon, and the deep cycles of the sky. The geometry of Serpent Mound is not mathematical in the modern, symbolic sense. There are no equations carved into stone. Yet it is mathematical in a deeper way. It reflects an understanding of proportion, repetition, and harmony, principles that lie at the heart of both geometry and astronomy. The serpent is not merely shaped like a living creature. It is shaped like time itself, flowing, coiling, and returning again. Serpent Mound as an astronomical instrument. For ancient societies, the sky was not distant or abstract. It was immediate, alive, and deeply connected to survival. The movement of the sun determined the seasons, the timing of planting and harvesting, and the rhythm of ceremonial life. To understand Serpent Mound fully, we must see it not only as a work of art or symbolism, but as a functional astronomical instrument, carefully aligned with celestial events. The most compelling evidence for this interpretation lies in the relationship between the serpent's form and the solar cycle. Researchers have long noted that key points along Serpent Mound correspond to the position of the setting sun during critical moments of the year. These alignments are not perfect in a modern, mechanical sense, but they do not need to be. They are accurate within the limits required for seasonal observation, and, more importantly, they are consistent. At the summer solstice, when the sun reaches its highest point in the sky and the day is longest, the setting sun aligns with the serpent's head. Standing near the oval shape in front of the open jaws, an observer would see the sun descend along the horizon in a way that visually completes the scene. Light meeting earth, sky meeting symbol. This moment likely held immense ritual importance. In agricultural societies, the summer solstice marked both abundance and transition, the peak of growth and the beginning of decline. The winter solstice, by contrast, is associated with rebirth. The days are shortest, the sun is at its weakest, and yet from this moment forward, the light begins to return. Several of the serpent's curves appear to point toward the setting sun during this time as well, suggesting that the entire body of the serpent may function as a map of the sun's yearly journey. The serpent does not merely point at the sky, it traces time. The equinoxes, when day and night are equal, also appear to play a role. These moments of balance were often seen as times of cosmic harmony, when opposing forces briefly align. Some scholars argue that specific bends in the serpent's body frame the equinox sunsets, marking these transitional points in the calendar. While equinox alignments are more difficult to prove archaeologically, their symbolic importance fits seamlessly within the broader pattern. Beyond the sun, there is growing evidence that Serpent Mound may also reflect knowledge of lunar cycles. The moon follows a more complex rhythm than the sun, including an 18.6-year cycle that affects how far north or south it rises and sets on the horizon. Tracking this cycle requires long-term observation across generations. Some researchers suggest that the serpent's curves and nodal points correspond to these extreme lunar positions, indicating a level of astronomical awareness that rivals that of ancient monuments in Europe. If this is true, the implications are profound. It would mean that the builders of Serpent Mound were not only farmers or ritual specialists, but astronomers, careful observers who understood time as a series of overlapping cycles. Solar years, lunar months, and long-term celestial rhythms were all woven into a single coherent system. Importantly, these observations were not recorded in writing. They were recorded in earth and movement. Knowledge was made permanent by shaping the land itself. Each solstice, each equinox, each significant lunar event would reaffirm the wisdom of the ancestors. Children would grow up watching elders point to the horizon, standing at specific places along the serpent, learning when to plant, when to harvest, and when to gather for ceremony. This is where Serpent Mound invites comparison with Stonehenge. Both monuments use the horizon as a measuring tool. Both encode astronomical knowledge into durable forms, and both transform observation into ritual. Yet Serpent Mound does so with remarkable subtlety. There are no towering stones, no obvious markers. Instead, the knowledge is embedded in curves, alignments, and relationships that reveal themselves only through time and attention. Serpent Mound reminds us that science does not require laboratories or telescopes. It requires patience, pattern recognition, and a deep relationship with nature. The astronomers of the Ohio Valley read the sky the way others read texts. And instead of writing books, they wrote calendars across the land, ensuring that their understanding of the cosmos would endure long after their names were forgotten. In this way, Serpent Mound is not merely aligned with the heavens. It is a dialogue between earth and sky, a silent conversation that has continued for nearly 1,000 years, waiting for us to listen again. The astronomers of the Ohio Valley. Who were they? To appreciate the sophistication of Serpent Mound, we must turn our attention to its creators, not as anonymous mound builders, but as members of complex societies with specialized knowledge. The astronomers of the Ohio Valley were not isolated geniuses. They were part of living communities in which observation, ritual, and social organization were deeply intertwined. These societies were structured, though not in the hierarchical, imperial sense familiar from ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. Power was not concentrated in kings, but distributed among clans, elders, and ritual specialists. Among them were individuals whose role was to observe the sky, remember patterns, and interpret celestial events. Their authority did not come from force, but from knowledge that sustained the community. Without written language, these astronomers relied on long-term memory and oral transmission. Observations of the sun and moon were passed down through stories, songs, and ceremonies. Each generation inherited not just facts, but methods. Where to stand, when to watch, how to interpret what was seen. Serpent Mound itself may have functioned as a teaching tool, a physical reference that ensured consistency across centuries. The tools of these astronomers were simple yet powerful. They used the horizon as a measuring line, noting where the sun rose and set at different times of the year. They tracked shadows, changes in daylight, and the phases of the moon. Over time, patterns emerged. What we might call data was embedded in experience. Precision came not from instruments, but from repetition. Crucially, astronomy in the Ohio Valley was not separated from spirituality. The sky was alive with meaning. The sun was not just a star. It was a life-giving force. The moon governed water, fertility, and time itself. Eclipses, comets, and unusual celestial events were moments of great significance, interpreted as messages or transformations rather than anomalies. This worldview shaped how knowledge was preserved. Instead of charts and calculations, information was encoded in ritual movement and sacred space. Walking the serpent at specific times of year may have mirrored the movement of the sun. Standing at certain points along the mound may have marked transitions in the calendar. In this way, astronomy was learned through participation, not abstraction. The astronomers of the Ohio Valley also understood something modern science has only recently begun to appreciate: the value of deep time. Tracking an 18.6-year lunar cycle requires patience and continuity. It demands a culture that thinks beyond individual lifespans. Such thinking reflects stability, cooperation, and trust in the future, qualities often overlooked in discussions of ancient societies. Importantly, this knowledge was not used for domination. There is no evidence that astronomical insight was employed to control populations or assert political power. Instead, it appears to have been shared openly, reinforcing communal rhythms and shared identity. Everyone depended on the sun and the seasons, Understanding them was a collective necessity. By recognizing the astronomers of the Ohio Valley as scientists in their own right, we challenge the narrow definition of science as something that only exists in written equations and instruments. Their science was observational, symbolic, and embodied. It was no less rigorous, only differently expressed. Serpent Mound stands as their legacy, not a monument to rulers or conquest, but to knowledge itself, a reminder that human curiosity about the sky is universal, and that long before modern telescopes, people were already reading the heavens with astonishing clarity, guided by patience, community, and a profound respect for the natural world. The serpent as a universal symbol. The choice of a serpent as the central form of this monumental earthwork was no accident. Across cultures and across time, the serpent has emerged as one of humanity's most powerful and enduring symbols. To understand Serpent Mound fully, we must explore what the serpent meant, not just to the peoples of the Ohio Valley, but to the human imagination as a whole. At its most fundamental level, the serpent represents life energy. It moves without limbs, flowing directly across the ground, bridging the boundary between earth and motion. It sheds its skin, appearing to be reborn. This simple biological fact made the serpent a natural symbol of renewal, transformation, and continuity, concepts central to societies deeply attuned to cycles of nature. In many indigenous North American traditions, the serpent is associated with water, fertility, and the underworld, not as a place of evil, but as a realm of origins and power. Water emerges from the earth, crops rise from soil, and life itself comes from hidden depths. The serpent, dwelling close to the ground and often near water, becomes a mediator between worlds. When we widen our perspective, the parallels are striking. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl embodied the union of sky and earth, knowledge and creation. In ancient Europe, serpents appear carved into stones and metalwork, often linked to solar symbols and seasonal rites. In Asia, dragons, serpent-like beings, govern rain, time, and cosmic balance. Again and again, the serpent is associated not with chaos, but with order through movement. At Serpent Mound, this symbolism takes on a distinctly astronomical dimension. The serpent's winding body mirrors the apparent path of the sun across the horizon throughout the year, never rising or setting in exactly the same place, yet always following a predictable rhythm. The spiral tail evokes infinity and cyclical time. The open mouth suggests a moment of transformation, consumption, birth, or passage. The oval shape in front of the serpent's jaws deepens this symbolism. Many scholars interpret it as an egg, a universal symbol of creation and potential. Others see it as the sun itself, caught at a moment of cosmic drama, perhaps an eclipse, or the sun being swallowed and reborn. In mythic language, these are not literal events, but metaphors for renewal and balance. What matters most is not choosing a single interpretation, but recognizing that Serpent Mound operates on multiple levels at once. It is visual, symbolic, and experiential. It speaks in a language of form rather than words, allowing different meanings to coexist without contradiction. This layered symbolism reinforces the idea that Serpent Mound was never meant to be purely functional. Even if it served as an astronomical marker, it was also a story written in earth, a cosmological narrative made permanent in the landscape. By walking the serpent, observing the sun, and participating in seasonal rituals, people were not just tracking time. They were reaffirming their place within a living universe. In modern culture, we often separate science from myth, fact from symbol. Serpent Mound reminds us that this division is artificial. For its builders, understanding the cosmos meant engaging with it emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually all at once. The serpent was not a decoration placed upon astronomical knowledge. It was the form that made that knowledge meaningful. In this way, the great Earth Serpent of Ohio becomes more than a local monument. It becomes part of a global human tradition, a reminder that long before telescopes and textbooks, people used symbols, stories, and the land itself to express profound truths about time, life, and the sky above. Serpent Mound and Stonehenge, parallel visions of the cosmos. At first glance, Serpent Mound and Stonehenge could not appear more different. One rises from the plains of southern England in massive blocks of stone. The other lies low against an Ohio ridge, shaped from soil and grass. Stonehenge dominates the horizon. Serpent Mound hides within it. And yet, when we look beyond materials and appearance, a deeper connection begins to emerge. Both monuments are expressions of a shared human impulse, the desire to understand time, order, and the structure of the cosmos. Each transforms the natural landscape into a tool for observing the sky. Each encodes astronomical knowledge in a form meant to endure for generations. And each reflects a society capable of sustained observation, long-term planning, and collective effort. Stonehenge is often described as a solar monument, famously aligned with the sunrise of the summer solstice. Its stones frame light, creating a dramatic moment when the sun appears exactly where it is expected to be. Serpent Mound achieves a similar effect, but in a subtler way. Instead of framing the sun with stone, it guides the observer's gaze along curves and alignments, directing attention toward the horizon at specific times of year. This difference is not a matter of sophistication, but of cultural expression. Stonehenge speaks in the language of verticality and permanence. Serpent Mound speaks in horizontality and flow. One asserts presence, the other invites participation. Both require deep understanding of the sun's movement, and both reflect a worldview in which celestial order is mirrored on Earth. There is also a profound similarity in how these monuments integrate ritual and science. At Stonehenge, astronomical alignments likely coincided with gatherings, ceremonies, and social events. The same is true for Serpent Mound. The observation of solstices and equinoxes was not a private, technical act. It was a communal experience. Knowledge was reinforced through shared ritual, turning astronomy into culture. For centuries, European monuments like Stonehenge were treated as evidence of ancient genius, while North American earthworks were dismissed or misunderstood. This imbalance reveals a deeper issue, a tendency to equate intelligence with familiar materials and forms. Stone feels more permanent than earth. Rectangles feel more rational than curves. Writing feels more authoritative than oral tradition. Serpent Mound challenges these assumptions. This precision is not immediately obvious, but it is real. Its knowledge is not written down, but it is preserved. And its creators were no less capable than their counterparts across the Atlantic. They simply worked with different materials and expressed their understanding in different ways. In fact, one could argue that Serpent Mound demonstrates an even more intimate relationship with the environment. It does not dominate the landscape. It becomes part of it. Wind, rain, and time are not enemies to be resisted, but partners in preservation. The mound changes subtly with the seasons, just as the sky does, a living monument to a living cosmos. By placing Serpent Mound alongside Stonehenge, we are not diminishing either. We are expanding our understanding of what ancient knowledge looked like across the world. Advanced astronomy did not belong to one civilization or one continent. It emerged wherever people watched the sky carefully, remembered what they saw, and chose to encode that knowledge in lasting form. In this light, Serpent Mound is not an outlier. It is part of a global pattern, a reminder that humanity has always been capable of deep insight, even when history has failed to recognize it. Modern research and new ways of seeing. For much of its recorded history, Serpent Mound was studied with limited tools and limited perspectives. Researchers walked the site, measured distances by hand, and relied heavily on intuition. While these early efforts were valuable, they could not fully reveal the complexity of a monument designed to be understood across space and time. In recent decades, however, new technologies have transformed how we see Serpent Mound and what we are able to ask of it. One of the most important breakthroughs came with aerial photography and satellite imagery. From above, the serpent's proportions, curves, and overall coherence become unmistakable. What appears fragmented at ground level resolves into a single, fluid form. This bird's-eye view has allowed researchers to test geometric hypotheses, measure alignments more precisely, and identify subtle features that are invisible from below. Even more revealing has been the use of LiDAR scanning, a technology that can penetrate vegetation and create high-resolution models of the terrain. LiDAR has confirmed that Serpent Mound's shape is not the product of erosion or later modification, but the result of deliberate construction. It has also revealed additional earthworks in the surrounding landscape, suggesting that Serpent Mound was part of a larger ceremonial and observational complex rather than an isolated creation. Computer-based astronomical modeling has further strengthened the case for celestial alignment. By reconstructing the position of the sun and moon as they would have appeared centuries ago, accounting for changes in Earth's axial tilt, researchers can test whether alignments correspond to solstices, equinoxes, and lunar extremes. While not every proposed alignment withstands scrutiny, enough consistent correlations remain to rule out coincidence. Of course, modern research has also fueled debate. Some scholars argue that astronomical interpretations risk projecting meaning where none was intended. They caution against romanticizing the past or assuming precision beyond what the evidence supports. These critiques are valuable not because they disprove the astronomical model, but because they force it to be more rigorous. What is increasingly clear, however, is that Serpent Mound was designed with intention. Whether every curve marks a specific celestial event is less important than the broader pattern. Geometry, landscape, and sky are deeply intertwined. The monument reflects a worldview in which the Earth itself was a canvas for knowledge. Modern science has also helped correct earlier misconceptions. The idea that Serpent Mound was built by a lost or foreign civilization has been thoroughly discredited. There is now overwhelming evidence that indigenous peoples of the region possessed both the organizational capacity and the intellectual framework required to create such a monument. This recognition represents not just a scholarly shift, but a moral one, a step toward restoring credit where it is long overdue. Perhaps the most profound contribution of modern research is not technological but philosophical. By revealing the sophistication of Serpent Mound, it challenges us to reconsider what counts as knowledge. Precision does not always look like equations. Science does not always announce itself with instruments and texts. Sometimes it lies quietly in the shape of a hill, waiting for the right moment and the right perspective to be understood. In this sense, modern technology has not replaced ancient wisdom. It has simply given us the tools to see what was always there, why this knowledge was lost. Given the sophistication of Serpent Mound and the depth of knowledge it represents, a natural question arises. How could such understanding disappear? How could a system capable of tracking celestial cycles across generations fade into obscurity, leaving behind only silent earthworks and unanswered questions? The first part of the answer lies in impermanence, not of intelligence but of social systems. The cultures of the Ohio Valley were not static. They adapted to changing climates, shifting resources, and evolving trade networks. Over time, communities moved, merged, or transformed. When a society reorganizes itself, specialized knowledge, especially knowledge held by a small group of ritual experts, can be lost or altered. Climate change likely played a role as well. Periods of drought, cooling, or ecological stress can disrupt agricultural cycles and force populations to relocate. When survival becomes the primary concern, long-term observational traditions may be interrupted. A calendar that requires generations of continuity is fragile in the face of sudden change. Another critical factor was the oral nature of knowledge transmission. Without writing, astronomical understanding was preserved through memory, ritual, and participation. This method can be remarkably accurate, but it depends on uninterrupted cultural continuity. If ceremonies cease, if sacred places are abandoned, or if elders are lost before teaching the next generation, entire systems of knowledge can vanish within a few lifetimes. The most devastating rupture, however, came with European colonization. Disease, displacement, and violence shattered indigenous societies across North America. Sacred sites were abandoned, destroyed, or misunderstood. Knowledge that had been carefully preserved for centuries was dismissed as superstition or erased entirely. The serpent remained, but the language needed to read it was silenced. It is also important to recognize that some knowledge may not be truly lost, but transformed. Elements of ancient cosmology survive in stories, symbols, and traditions passed down through descendant communities, even if their original astronomical context is no longer explicit. Loss, in this sense, is not always absolute. It can be partial, fragmented, and hidden. What Serpent Mound reminds us is that knowledge is not only stored in books or buildings. It lives in people, practices, and places. When any one of these is removed, the system weakens. When all are disrupted, even the most profound understanding can fade from view. Yet the mound itself endures. Quiet, patient, and resilient, it has outlasted the societies that built it and the misunderstandings that followed. In doing so, it offers us not just a lesson about the past, but a warning for the future. Knowledge survives only as long as cultures choose to protect and transmit it. The loss of this ancient astronomical tradition is not merely a historical tragedy. It is a reminder of how fragile human understanding can be, and how easily it can be overlooked when we fail to listen to the voices of the past. Conclusion: rethinking ancient knowledge. Serpent Mound does not shout its meaning. It does not rise dramatically against the sky or demand attention through sheer size or stone. Instead, it waits, quietly embedded in the landscape, shaped by human hands and natural forces alike. And perhaps that is its greatest lesson. For a long time, history told us that advanced knowledge followed a single path. From the ancient Near East to Greece, from Rome to modern Europe, and outward from there. Serpent Mound disrupts that story. It shows us that deep scientific understanding can emerge wherever people observe carefully, think collectively, and honor continuity across generations. This monument is not simply a work of art or a relic of belief. It is evidence of a worldview in which geometry, astronomy, and symbolism were inseparable. The astronomers of the Ohio Valley did not separate science from life. They lived inside their calendar. They walked through their cosmology. Time was not counted, it was experienced. When we place Serpent Mound alongside Stonehenge, we are not making a provocative comparison for its own sake. We are acknowledging a shared human capacity, different materials, different myths, the same intellectual ambition, the same desire to align human existence with the greater rhythms of the universe. In the end, Serpent Mound asks something of us. Not admiration, but humility. It reminds us that knowledge does not always look the way we expect it to look. That intelligence can be encoded in curves instead of equations. That wisdom can be carried by soil instead of stone. And it invites a final question, one that extends far beyond Ohio, far beyond archaeology. How many other landscapes are still speaking, waiting for us to learn how to listen? Serpent Mound has endured for centuries, quietly marking the passage of the sun, the turning of seasons, and the long arc of human curiosity. In recognizing its meaning, we do more than recover a forgotten past. We expand our understanding of what it means to know the world and our place within it. Epilogue: listening to the earth again. If Serpent Mound teaches us anything beyond archaeology, it is how to slow down our way of knowing. The monument does not reveal itself instantly. It requires patience, returning at different times of year, watching the horizon, noticing subtle changes in light and shadow. In a modern world driven by speed and immediacy, this alone feels almost radical. The people who built Serpent Mound lived without clocks, without screens, without written schedules. And yet they possessed a profound sense of time, one grounded not in minutes and hours, but in seasons, cycles, and return. Their knowledge was not extracted from nature. It was developed in relationship with it. Observation was an act of respect. Today, as we face climate instability and ecological uncertainty, this perspective feels newly relevant. Ancient astronomy was never just about predicting the sky. It was about aligning human behavior with natural rhythms. Knowing when not to act was just as important as knowing when to act. The sky was a guide, not a resource. Serpent Mound also invites us to rethink preservation. We often protect monuments by isolating them, fencing them off, freezing them in time. But Serpent Mound survives precisely because it remained part of a living landscape. Grass grows on it. Rain reshapes it gently. The sun still sets where it always has. It continues to function not as a museum object, but as a relationship between land and sky. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is not that the original astronomical knowledge was partially lost, but that for so long we failed to recognize what was standing in front of us. The serpent was always there. The alignments never stopped. Only our willingness to see them faded. In the end, Serpent Mound is not just a question about the past. It is a mirror held up to the present. It asks whether we still know how to observe without dominating, to measure without owning, to understand without conquering. The ancient astronomers of the Ohio Valley left no texts, no names, no monuments to themselves. What they left instead was an invitation, etched into the land, to remember that knowledge begins with attention, and that the earth itself can be a teacher if we are quiet enough to listen.